Welcome to the Leading Sheep webinar series on pregnancy scanning merinos to better manage your flock, featuring Pat Hegarty from Kalenya near Longreach and Chris Shands, a rural advisor from New South Wales. This is part 5 of 6, where Chris Shands discusses how to manage your flock using the scanning information.
Now, the use of pregnancy scanning information, if you think about your best and worst performers, certainly the worst performers are your dry ewes and those that fail to rear, but the best performers in your flock are those ewes that have a higher reproduction rate, and generally they're the older ewes, which then means if you keep those in the flock for an extra year, you then need to bring in fewer maiden ewes into the flock, and they're the ewes that won't have anywhere near as many lambs. And then obviously the scanning helps you to manage those different parts of the flock a little bit differently. So moving on to the next slide, dry ewes. Around 5% of ewes will be dry in any year. A lot of merino people aren't too worried if it's a bit more than that because they've got the opportunity as wool cutters. But for the meat sheep people, then that's obviously a pretty strong priority to get as many lambs out of those ewes. We reckon if there's more than about 7% dry, there's likely to be a bit of a fertility problem. And 90% of the reasons that occurs is because of the fat score or the condition score of the ewe and the live weight at joining. And the other 10% is sort of ram fertility and contact with ewes. So I always say to my producers, when you're joining, get around your ewes, make sure the rams are with the ewes and joining. Now we talked about some of those options, culling and rejoining. If you want to give your dry ewes a second chance, and that's not a bad way to go. Put a permanent ear notch in them, so when they turn up the next year, you'll see that they were dry the previous year. And then culling your dry ewes will help to increase the net reproduction rate of the flock a bit. If you identify at lamb marking time or at weaning time ewes that have failed to rear through wet and drying, then that'll certainly help to lift the reproduction rate of the flock a bit more. And that's what Pat was saying about putting some pressure on reproductive characteristics, and that's why identifying them and culling those ewes will help to lift the reproduction rate of that flock. Just looking at our single-bearing ewes, get them scanned up, and if they're in sort of condition score 2.5 or 3, they generally shouldn't be a problem in terms of their nutrition. You might want to just sort of put them into a prepared lambing paddock, which might have had the predators controlled in it, some fox baiting and some shooting, and get rid of the feral pigs would be a great thing. But you can certainly lamb large mobs of single-bearing ewes together without any mismothering occurring. So they pretty well look after themselves unless they're in very skinny condition, and then you're likely to see more problems occurring. If we go on to the twin-bearing ewes, the condition score of those ewes, and that's what I said at the beginning, the condition score at scanning time is so important, especially for these twinners. So if those ewes are, in that 2 condition score or fat score sort of category, I'd be really thinking I needed to get the feed cart out. Now I know in central and western Queensland it's not always, not always able to lamb on green feed, but gee whiz, green is the pasture which will aid enormously in lamb survival, and it then means that if you've got some green when you're lambing, you haven't got the amount of supplementary feed to provide. So I think the supplement that Pat was talking about really does help to put milk in the udder. It lifts lamb birth weight so that the lambs have just got that extra ½ kilo on them to be able to survive a bit more effectively, and it will help to reduce pregnancy toxemia in those years when feed's a bit scarce and the ewes may be spending a bit of time scouring paddocks for that bit of extra feed. So that really does help. In the I guess more settled areas, then moving your twinners into the lambing paddocks to give the ewes a bit of a chance to work out where they're going to lamb is useful. Lamb them in small mobs, and some of the producers who've been through our workshops are saying back to us that they prefer to lamb their twin-bearing ewes in smaller mobs than what we've recommended there is about 250. They're saying they're much better lamb survival in mobs of 100 to 150 ewes. So if you're able to manage those smaller groups, then you'll find that lamb survival will improve significantly. And look, stocking rates for more settled areas, I guess 18 ewes per hectare in prepared lambing paddocks just really gives enough space and privacy for those ewes to lamb on, and we're obviously selecting lambing paddocks with plenty of feed to meet those nutritional targets.